The water stretched forever. It rolled and heaved in every direction, a living skin of blue that never ended, never yielded. In daylight, the ocean of Nereth 7 shimmered with sheets of glassy turquoise, dazzling and cruel, reflecting a sun that baked the surface until her skin cracked with salt. At night, the water turned black as obsidian, swallowing the stars until only their trembling reflections flickered on the swells. No matter the hour, the sea gave no comfort. Only the sound, an endless, ceaseless rhythm of waves colliding, hissing, withdrawing, like the planet's own heart refusing to stop beating. Aeyla had lived 3 cycles in that sound. Her raft drifted at the mercy of the current, a fragile patchwork of lashed driftwood, vine rope, and planks scavenged from the corpses of machines. Every breath of wind made it groan, every slap of water made her tense. One careless wave, one jagged strike against basalt, and the raft would break apart, leaving her to thrash in the open sea. And yet, she sat upon it like a queen upon her throne. Her small frame was cross-legged, bare feet planted on the wood, her spear balanced across her lap. She was not like the others of her kind. The Varith were tall, resplendent, their limbs long and elegant, their bodies streaked with rivers of light. When they walked, they glowed like constellations come to earth. Aeyla was the opposite of all that. She was only 3 feet tall, her limbs short, her stride clumsy, her voice sharp and unyielding. Even her glow was faint, thin threads of bioluminescence beneath pale skin, pulsing weakly as if her very blood refused to shine as brightly as it should. Her people had called her a deformity, an aberration, and when her tongue had been sharper than her fear, when she had stood before the High Council and demanded to know why the smallest must kneel before the tallest, they had decided she was something worse. Not a deformity, a danger. She remembered the chamber as clearly as if she stood there now, the vaulted ceiling of crystal, the ring of elders towering above her, their 7-foot forms cloaked in silver. Their laughter had echoed down at her like falling stones. Why must the smallest be treated as less? She had asked, her voice breaking but unyielding. Is strength only measured in height? Their answer had been her exile. No blade, no cell. Just banishment. To Nereth 7. A world of water. A world where the lonely waves would erode her into nothing. But she had not eroded. Not yet. The raft rocked gently as she pulled her spear back and hurled it into the water. The splash was sharp, a crack of sound against the hush of waves. She leaned forward, both hands gripping the vine rope tied to the shaft, and pulled. From the surface, something thrashed, an eel, silver-scaled, long as her body, its jaw snapping with tiny glass needle teeth. She drew it in, her muscles burning, until it flopped onto the raft, twisting in desperation. "Shoo!" she whispered, though her voice was too dry and hoarse to soothe. With a practiced movement, she drove a shard of rusted alloy into its skull. The body shuddered once, then went limp. The smell of brine and blood mingled with the salt-saturated air. She pushed damp strands of hair back from her forehead, staring at her catch. Enough food for a night. Enough to live another day. Another night, she rasped aloud. Her words sounded strange, unused. She spoke to herself often, just to remember the shape of speech, though sometimes the silence of the sea swallowed even her own voice. Another night you survived. The water answered with its endless heartbeat. Later, she crouched over her firestone. It was no real fire, just a chunk of black mineral that, when struck, released a chemical heat strong enough to sear flesh. She had found it years ago, lodged in a carcass of some abandoned mining drone. She balanced the eel's flesh over it on a makeshift grill of bent alloy rods. The scent rose quickly, oily, metallic, faintly sweet, tinged with smoke. The food of survival, not of joy. She chewed slowly, staring across the horizon, her golden eyes narrowing against the setting sun. The light spilled molten orange across the waves, broken into shards of fire by the water's movement. At dusk, when the tide fell and the winds quieted, she always climbed the basalt spire that rose behind her camp. Its surface was jagged, cold, slick with spray, but she had worn the path with her small hands and feet. She knew every jutting edge, every grip. At the summit, the world unfolded. The horizon spread unbroken in all directions, a flat line that mocked the idea of land. The sky above shifted from gold to purple to black. Stars pricked through one by one, alien and sharp, constellations that bore no name she knew. Sometimes she would trace her own constellations, inventing names, the spear, the silent mouth, the broken wing. Her people would never hear them. But naming them made them real, and for a moment she could pretend the stars were hers. She hugged her knees to her chest. Her glow pulsed faintly through her skin, as if her loneliness itself demanded to be seen. That was when she noticed the streak. At first, she thought it was lightning, bright, sudden, a gash across the sky. But it did not vanish. It burned. It tore across the heavens in a steady arc, white-hot, trailing smoke. Her breath caught in her throat. Her voice cracked the silence. What? The object blazed brighter, growing, its tail of fire splitting the night in two. Then, with a sound like the planet itself roaring, it disappeared beyond the horizon. A moment later, the world shook with a deep boom of impact. Steam and spray rose in the distance, climbing like a pillar into the sky. A pod. A ship. Something. Someone. She stood too quickly, nearly slipping on the slick rock. Her heart pounded, her glow flickering wildly beneath her skin. Her golden eyes widened, locked on the fading trail of smoke. Not a storm. Not lightning. Not a trick of her imagination. Something had come down from the stars. Her voice trembled, thin but fierce, the words almost lost to the sea breeze. Not alone. She scrambled down the basalt, hands scraping raw, feet burning with each slip and catch. At the bottom she threw herself onto the raft, hardly noticing the way it rocked under her sudden weight. She seized her paddle and plunged it into the water, pulling hard, the current tugging at her arms. Spray lashed her face. The night swallowed her, only the stars above and the trail of smoke ahead. She paddled with every ounce of strength in her small body, breath ragged, heart wild. For the first time in 3 cycles, she was not moving to survive. She was moving toward hope. And she paddled faster. The sea was restless that night. Waves lifted Aeyla's raft and dropped it again, the wood groaning, the vines creaking at every joint. Salt spray stung her lips, her eyes, her skin. Above, clouds had gathered, thick as smoke, but the stars still peeked through in restless patterns. The air felt alive, charged with static. She paddled toward the rising plume on the horizon. The boom of the impact still echoed in her bones. Every few breaths, she craned her neck, searching the darkness. The trail of fire had vanished, but the smoke hung there, a faint smudge against the stars, curling and shifting. She followed it, muscles screaming with the rhythm of her strokes. Her mind raced. It could be wreckage. It could be a dead machine, another hollow carcass of metal that had wandered too close to Nerith Seven's magnetic storms. She had scavenged plenty of those before. Broken drones, fractured satellites, once even a mining rig half swallowed by barnacles. None of them had given her company. None of them had spoken back. But this felt different. She told herself not to hope, but the words rang hollow. The truth was there in her hands, the way they gripped the paddle until her knuckles ached. The truth was there in her breath, fast and shallow. The truth was in her glow, brighter than it had been in years, as though her own body betrayed the hunger she denied. Not alone. Hours passed. The current fought her, pulling sideways, dragging her raft into eddies. Once, a shadow broke the surface near her, a dorsal fin slicing through the waves. She froze, spear ready, until it slipped back into the depths. Her heart hammered, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. At last, the smoke grew thicker. She smelled it, burning metal, scorched ozone, the chemical tang of fuel. The water around her shimmered with slick rainbows of leaking fluids. Bubbles rose, hissing faintly before bursting. The sea tasted strange when the spray touched her tongue, bitter and sharp. Then she saw it. A shape bobbing in the waves, half submerged. Round, metallic, scarred black with re-entry burns. An escape pod. Its lights flickered weakly, red glows pulsing, then dying, then returning. A hiss of escaping steam rose from a crack in the hull. Her heart lurched. She paddled closer, the raft bumping gently against the side. The pod rocked with the swell, dented and bent, but still intact. She scrambled up, fingers digging into the slick surface, her small body pulling itself atop the hull. A hatch faced the sky. A round window. She peered through it, then gasped, stumbling back so quickly she nearly slipped into the water. Inside, behind fogged glass and streaks of condensation, was a face. Not Varith. Not any alien she had seen before. Human. The figure floated limp in the harness, head lolling against the side, dark hair plastered to a pale forehead. His skin was ghostly under the emergency lights, his lips tinged blue. The glass muffled the sound, but she thought, she heard him breathe. Alive. Her glow pulsed wildly. Her chest felt too small to hold the rush of air she sucked in. Alive. A voice that was not hers. A presence that was not the sea. She scrambled to the hatch. Her small hands fumbled over the smooth metal until they found the release lever. She pulled. Nothing. She braced her whole body, legs straining, arms shaking, and pulled again. The lever screeched, resisting, then gave way with a jolt. With a hiss of compressed air, the hatch cracked. Smoke and steam poured out, stinking of burned circuits and scorched fuel. She coughed, covering her mouth with her wrist, and pushed the hatch wide. The man inside slumped forward. His chest moved faintly, shallow, but steady. Aeyla stared, wide-eyed. He was enormous to her, twice her size at least, even slumped and weak. His arms dangled like the limbs of a fallen tree, heavy and awkward. His clothes, strange fabric, singed and torn, clung to his body in tatters. She whispered, her voice trembling. Stars above. Her hand hovered in the air, uncertain. She had dreamed of voices, of company, but never like this. Never a being of flesh, breathing, fragile, needing her. Another hiss of steam jolted her from her trance. The pod creaked, sinking lower into the water. If she did nothing, it would drag him under. She snapped into motion. Move, move, she barked as though he could hear her. Her small hands clawed at the straps across his chest. The buckles resisted, foreign to her, but she tugged and twisted until one snapped free. She slipped, caught herself, then pulled harder. Another buckle gave way. Then another. At last, his body sagged loose. She braced herself, planted her feet, and pulled with every scrap of strength she had. He was heavy. His body dwarfed her. Muscles in her arms and back screamed as she dragged him up, inch by inch, from the pod's seat. His boots scraped, his arm swung uselessly, his head lolled. Come on, she hissed through her teeth. Don't you dare sink now. Finally, with one last wrench, she dragged him free. His body tumbled onto the raft with a thud that nearly capsized it. The raft dipped, water sloshing up, but held. Aeyla collapsed beside him, chest heaving. For a long moment, she just stared. His face was pale, shadowed with stubble, lashes dark against his skin. His chest rose and fell, faint but steady. His lips parted, releasing a weak, wet gasp. Aeyla's own breath trembled. He was real. The sea hissed around them, waves slapping wood, smoke curling into the sky. She pressed her small hand against his chest, feeling the faint beat of his heart beneath. Her glow spread across her skin, casting him in soft light. Not alone, she whispered again. Her voice broke this time, not from fear, not from despair, but from something she had not felt in so long that it almost hurt. Hope. She worked quickly. She covered him with woven kelp to protect him from the spray, bound his head wound with strips torn from her own garment, and tipped his head to let the sea water drain from his mouth. His breaths grew steadier, though still shallow. The pod hissed one last time before sinking beneath the waves. She did not watch it go. Her gaze stayed on him. The ocean had taken so much from her. But tonight, it had given something back. As the night wore on, she sat beside him, guarding him, her small body curled against the rising and falling of his chest. For the first time in years, she was not singing to herself. The human did not wake at dawn. Aeyla sat cross-legged beside him, her small frame hunched in the damp chill, watching his chest rise and fall in shallow rhythm. His breaths rattled faintly, as though his lungs fought the memory of water. His skin looked washed out under the weak morning light, the faintest trace of pink warming his cheeks only when he exhaled. She had not slept. The night had been a blur of waves, of checking his pulse again and again, of listening for each breath with her ear pressed to his chest. The sound had soothed her, a reminder that she was not alone anymore, but also frightened her. What if it stopped? When the sun finally broke through the horizon, spilling molten gold across the restless waves, she whispered a soft prayer to stars she did not believe in. "Stay," she said. "Please stay." By mid-morning, he stirred. Aeyla had just returned from the tide pool with a bladderweed sack of fresh water, its translucent skin bulging with captured rain. She crouched to pour a trickle between his lips when his eyelids fluttered. She froze. The man's face twitched, first his brow, then his jaw. His throat moved as he swallowed the water. Then his eyes opened. They were startlingly different from her own. Not the deep gold of the Varith, but a washed sky color, blue-gray, like stormlight. They blinked against the sun, unfocused at first, then narrowing at her. Aeyla's pulse leapt. For a long heartbeat, neither moved. The raft rocked gently beneath them, the sea hissing at the edges. She sat perfectly still, her glow faintly illuminating her silver skin. His gaze tracked her, dazed, wary. His voice came, hoarse, barely a rasp. "Who?" The word was strange, guttural, rough. She tilted her head, confused but fascinated. His sounds were so different, thicker, harder than the lilting cadences of the Varith tongue. She answered softly, placing her palm against her chest. "Aeyla." He blinked, frowning faintly. His lips moved again, struggling. "Aeyla." Her glow pulsed. The way he shaped her name, awkward, clumsy, but trying, sent a thrill through her chest. She nodded quickly, repeating herself more firmly. "Aeyla." He coughed, grimaced, then whispered, "Elias." His hand twitched against the wood of the raft, weak but deliberate. He tapped his chest. "Elias." Ayla's mouth parted. She repeated the sound carefully, her voice soft, curious. "Elias." His lips curved, the faintest ghost of a smile. It was the first smile she had seen in 3 years. He tried to sit, but the effort made him double over, coughing violently. Aeyla darted forward, her small hands pressing against his shoulder to steady him. "No," she murmured, though she knew he could not understand. "Rest." Too weak. Her hands must have been laughably tiny against his broad frame, but he stilled under her touch. His breathing slowed, though his gaze never left her. He studied her openly, eyes flicking across her short stature, her faintly glowing skin, the woven kelp that draped over her like patchwork cloth. She flushed under the scrutiny. No one had ever looked at her like that. Curious, yes, but not mocking. Not dismissive. He whispered something else, words tumbling too fast for her to catch. She shook her head, brow furrowing. "Don't know," she admitted softly. "Your words, don't know." Elias closed his eyes briefly, then raised one hand. His fingers trembled, but he managed to point at her, then tap his chest again. "Aeyla," he rasped. Then his hand moved back to his chest. "Elias." She brightened, nodding quickly. "Yes." She pointed at him. "Elias." She pressed her palm against her own chest. "Aeyla." His lips moved again, this time no word, just a quiet, breathless sound that might have been relief. The day stretched long, but Aeyla never left his side. She gave him tiny sips of water, chewed kelp down to a soft pulp so he could swallow it, adjusted the woven kelp blanket over his frame when the sea breeze bit cold. She spoke to him, even knowing he couldn't understand, telling him of the storms, of the predators below, of how she had pulled him from the pod. Her voice had not been used so much in years. It felt strange and raw in her throat, but good. Like waking up a muscle she had thought dead. Elias listened, or perhaps only stared at her glowing hands as they gestured. But once or twice his storm-colored eyes softened, and she hoped, he understood something of her care. When the sun dipped and the water turned copper, he drifted into shallow sleep again. Aeyla leaned back against the raft, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. Her glow painted the air around them in faint gold, like a lantern on the water. She whispered into the dusk, voice barely audible above the sea. "I saved you. Now you save me." Her eyes closed, and for the first time in 3 cycles, she did not feel afraid to dream. The sea was never gentle for long. At dawn, the water had been calm, sheets of rippling glass stretching to the horizon, tinted rose by the rising sun. But by midday, the wind shifted. Clouds boiled up from the south, dark and swollen, dragging long shadows over the waves. The air grew heavy, thick with salt and pressure, and the water changed its voice, from a hushed rhythm to a grinding snarl. Aeyla knew what that meant. A storm was coming, and storms brought teeth. Elias was stronger now, but only just. 2 days had passed since she pulled him from the pod. He could sit upright on the raft without swaying too badly, could sip water from his own hand instead of hers. His voice came more often, though she understood none of it. Strange human syllables, sometimes soft and coaxing, sometimes sharp with frustration when his words fell useless between them. But his eyes spoke more than his tongue. And today they were wary. Elias sat across from her, his broad shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the shifting horizon. The stormlight reflected in his gray-blue eyes, making them look like the sea itself, dark, restless, dangerous. Aeyla felt the hairs along her neck prickle. She dipped her paddle into the water, steering their fragile raft toward a basalt outcrop she knew nearby. If they could reach it before the storm broke, they might ride it out in relative safety. The first raindrops fell, cold, fat, slapping against her skin. The sea heaved beneath them, lifting the raft higher, then dropping it with a stomach-lurching tilt. The vines creaked, wood straining. Elias braced himself, one hand gripping the raft's edge, the other clumsy on her spare paddle. His jaw was tight, his breaths short. The storm had not even arrived yet, and already the ocean was restless. And then the shadows came. Aeyla saw it first, a ripple that cut against the rhythm of the waves, swift and deliberate. Then another, circling. The water near the raft grew darker, shifting unnaturally. Her golden eyes widened. "No!" She snatched up her spear, the alloy tip catching what little sunlight pierced the clouds. Elias noticed her tension instantly. He followed her gaze, squinting, then tensed himself. His hand clenched tighter on the paddle, knuckles whitening. The water broke. A dorsal fin sliced the surface, tall and jagged as a blade. Then another. Then 3. The predators moved fast, weaving circles around the raft. Their bodies were long and sleek, their scales mottled with ink-dark patterns that shimmered faintly in the gloom. A faint keening hum rose from beneath the waves, vibrating through the raft's boards. Aeyla's throat tightened. Razorfin. She had fought one before, and nearly lost an arm to its bite. Alone, She might escape with luck. But with Elias still weak, on a raft too small for both of them? The odds were bad. The water surged beside them. A pale snout broke the surface, long, narrow, filled with teeth like shards of glass. The creature lunged, jaws snapping just short of the raft's edge. Spray exploded, drenching them both. Elias flinched back, eyes wide, breath ragged. Aeyla planted her feet and struck. Her spear drove down, the alloy point scraping along armored scale. The creature shrieked, a horrible metallic sound, before sliding back into the deep. Elias shouted something she couldn't understand, his voice raw with urgency. He thrust his paddle like a club, smacking the water as another fin swept close. His movements were clumsy, desperate, but the force of his strikes surprised her. He wasn't useless. He wasn't fragile. Another lunge. Another set of teeth. Aeyla stabbed again, this time catching flesh. Blood blossomed in the water, dark ribbons curling in the storm surge. The razor fin thrashed, tail slapping the raft so hard it spun half around. The vines groaned. One plank cracked. Elias grabbed the side, anchoring them with sheer weight. His face was pale, jaw clenched, but his eyes burned. Together, they held on. The sea became chaos. Rain hammered down, turning the surface into shattered glass. Lightning split the sky, white veins across a bruised horizon. Thunder boomed, rolling deep and low, rattling the boards beneath their feet. And still the predators came. One lunged from beneath, smashing the raft upward. Aeyla screamed as she tumbled, her small body skidding across wet wood. She would have gone over, straight into those snapping jaws, if not for Elias. His hand shot out, huge and rough, seizing her wrist. She slammed into his chest, breath knocked from her lungs, but she was still on the raft. Still alive. His grip was iron. For a single heartbeat, their eyes locked. Her golden gaze wide, glowing in fear, his gray-blue fierce, unyielding. The storm raged around them, water streaming down his face, but in that moment, there was only the heat of his hand around hers. Then another shriek split the air, and reality returned. "Fight!" she barked, though he couldn't know the word. She wrenched free, raised her spear, and met the next strike with every ounce of fury her small body could hold. The alloy tip drove true this time, deep into the predator's eye. The creature convulsed, screeched, and vanished beneath the waves, blood bubbling to the surface. The others circled wider now, wary, their hum sharper, angrier. Elias raised his paddle, chest heaving, ready for another attack. Aeyla crouched low, spear dripping crimson, teeth bared. But the razor fin did not return. Not yet. Instead, the storm consumed them. Hours blurred into survival. They lashed themselves to the raft with vine rope, clung against the waves that wanted to tear them free. Lightning painted the sky in furious white, thunder answered with bone-shaking roars. The rain was endless, cold needles stabbing into their skin. Every so often, a shadow passed too close beneath them, reminding them the sea was not only storm but hunger. But none attacked again. Not while the blood of their kin still clouded the water. When the storm finally began to ebb, the world was unrecognizable. The sea lay heaving and broken, strewn with torn kelp and shattered driftwood. The raft held, barely, its seams groaning with every swell. Elias sagged against the boards, his body trembling from exhaustion. Aeyla slumped beside him, spear still clutched tight, her glow dim with fatigue. For a long time, there was only their breathing. Ragged, heavy, alive. At last, Elias turned his head toward her. His lips moved. She couldn't understand the words, but his tone, his eyes, were clear. Gratitude. Respect. She blinked, stunned, then let out a soft, breathless laugh. Her first laugh in years, raw and strange in her own ears. "Together," she whispered, tapping her chest, then pointing to him. "Together." He stared at her, then, slowly, nodded. And in that moment, amid ruin and salt, she knew, survival was no longer hers alone. The storm left the world in ruins. At dawn, the sea was quiet again, but not gentle. Swells rolled endlessly, heavy and bruised, dragging wreckage in their wake. Tangled mats of kelp drifted across the surface, torn loose from the deep. Splintered wood bobbed like bones. Fish floated belly up, their silver scales flashing in the sunlight. The air smelled sharp with salt and iron. Aeyla and Elias sat on their battered raft, soaked, exhausted, and alive. The vines that bound the planks together had frayed, 2 boards cracked nearly through. Every wave sent water sloshing across the surface. It would not last much longer. Aeyla knew what they needed: new shelter, stronger craft, and food enough to rebuild their strength. She also knew she could not do it alone anymore. Elias seemed to know it too. He was awake, propped against a half-salvaged beam, his storm-colored eyes scanning the wreckage. His face was pale, lips chapped from wind and salt, but there was a stubborn brightness in his gaze now. Not just survival, determination. Aeyla followed his stare. Ahead, jagged basalt rose from the water, dark and wet with spray. An islet, no bigger than a gathering hall back on her homeworld, but solid. Safe. She tapped his shoulder, then pointed. Land. He frowned, then followed her finger. His expression shifted. Relief softened the lines of his face. Land, he echoed hoarsely. Her glow pulsed in surprise. He had understood. Or at least repeated. Either way, the word hung between them like a bridge. Land, she said again, firmer, and began to paddle. They reached the islet by midday. The basalt was slick, ridged like a dragon's spine, but it rose high enough to resist the tide. Small pools collected in hollows, filled with darting shrimp and tiny fish. Above, seabirds circled, creatures with long hooked beaks and wings striped in black and white, their cries sharp as knives. Aeyla leapt lightly onto the rock, pulling vines to anchor what was left of the raft. Elias followed more slowly, his movements stiff but steady. He towered over her once he stood, his shadow long across the wet stone. She had never been so close to anyone so large, and for a moment her chest tightened. But then his gaze fell on her, not with mockery or disdain like her people's had, but simple weariness. Shared exhaustion. They were equals here. The ocean had made sure of it. They began to work. Aeyla showed him how to gather long strands of kelp from the tide pools, stripping them into rope with quick movements of her small hands. Elias watched, then mimicked, his fingers clumsier but strong. When he pulled, the strands came free in thick bundles that would have taken her twice as long. He found driftwood among the wreckage, beams weathered smooth, splinters of old hulls. He carried them easily, stacking them on the basalt like bones for a skeleton. She lashed them together with the kelp ropes, weaving tight knots. By evening, a new raft began to take shape. Not just a raft, but something sturdier. A flat platform reinforced with crossbeams, buoyant barrels from Elias's pod lashed beneath. It was rough, uneven, soaked with salt. But it would float. Aeyla stepped back, wiping sweat from her brow. Her glow shimmered faintly with pride. Good, she said, pointing at the raft. Good. Elias leaned against a beam, chest rising heavy with breath. His lips cracked into a smile, small but real. Good, he repeated. The words struck her like a gift. That night, they made a fire of sorts. Driftwood dried in the brief sun, sparked with a shard of alloy against stone. The flames hissed and smoked, fragile against the damp air, but warm. They sat side by side on the basalt, the fire crackling, the sea hissing around them. Aeyla roasted shellfish she had pried from the rocks, their juices dripping into the fire with sharp pops. The smell was rich, briny, faintly sweet. Elias tore one open clumsily, nearly burning his fingers, and muttered a curse she didn't understand. She laughed softly at the sound, shaking her head, and showed him how to wait, to crack the shell with a rock. He raised his brows at her demonstration, then mimicked it. When he succeeded, she clapped her small hands once, delighted. His answering smile was brighter this time. Later, when the fire dimmed and the stars pierced the clouds, they tried to teach each other words. Aeyla tapped her chest. Aeyla. Elias nodded, repeating softly, Aeyla. Then he tapped his own chest. Elias. She said it carefully, Elias. He chuckled, a low sound, and corrected her gently. Elias. She tried again. Us. His smile softened. He shook his head, but there was no frustration in his eyes. Only patience. Then he tapped the rock beneath them. Stone. She tilted her head, curious. Stone. He nodded, pleased. She pointed at the sea. Water. His gaze followed. Water, he echoed. Back and forth they went, clumsy, halting, laughing sometimes when the sounds twisted too strangely. Words became stones in a bridge between them, small but steady. For the first time, Aeyla felt the silence of Nereth 7 cracking open. The ocean no longer swallowed every sound. Now, voices echoed back. When sleep finally came, she curled on the basalt, kelp-woven mat beneath her. Elias stretched out not far away. His form was huge in the starlight, his breaths deep and steady. Aeyla lay awake a while, golden eyes fixed on the stars above. Her glow pulsed faintly in rhythm with the tide. For 3 cycles she had fought the sea alone. Built, lost, rebuilt. For 3 cycles, her voice had been swallowed whole. Now there was another voice, another heartbeat beside hers, and together they had built something new. The sea was calm again. For 2 days the water lay quiet, as though ashamed of the fury it had unleashed. Gentle waves lapped against the basalt islet, rocking the new raft Aeyla and Elias had built. The storm debris was gone now, carried away by the current, leaving behind only slick rocks, tide pools, and the steady cries of seabirds wheeling overhead. The air smelled fresher, cleaner, touched with the sweetness of kelp drying in the sun. For the first time in years, Aeyla felt something like peace. They had fallen into a rhythm. At dawn, she led Elias to the tide pools, showing him how to pry open shellfish and gather darting shrimp. At midday, he lifted heavy driftwood for her, shaped the bones of their raft, and found ingenious uses for pieces of his ruined pod. At night, they sat by the fire, roasting food, fumbling with words, laughing sometimes at their mistakes. Water, he would say, pointing at the sea. Water, she'd echo. Fire. He'd point at the flames. Fire. It was slow, but it was theirs. A bridge stretching farther every night. And yet, beneath the rhythm, silence remained. Not the empty silence of exile, but a heavy silence, what had not been said. That evening, the stars burned bright. The storm clouds had been swept away, leaving the sky sharp and endless. Constellations glimmered across the heavens, strange to Elias but deeply familiar to Aeyla. The twin arcs of the Wanderer curved above them, a reminder of long journeys. The spear-shaped cluster of the Hunter gleamed to the west. She had once studied those constellations with her kin, her voice rising in harmony with theirs as they recited the old names. Now, her voice was the only one left. She sat by the fire, spear across her knees, golden glow faint against the night. Elias sat nearby, turning a piece of wreckage in his hands, metal scorched and twisted, all that remained of his vessel. His face was shadowed by firelight, but his eyes shone, fixed on the sky as though searching for something far beyond it. Aeyla watched him for a long while, then spoke softly. Home. She pointed up, toward the constellations. Then she touched her chest. Aeyla, home. He looked at her, puzzled. She hesitated, then tried again. Aeyla, she pointed at herself, was home. She made a sweeping gesture, then pushed her small hand outward, away from her chest, into the dark. Gone. Elias tilted his head. His brow furrowed, but he was listening. Always listening. Aeyla drew in a long breath. She had not spoken this story aloud in cycles. But the words pressed against her throat, hungry to be heard. She pointed to the stars again. Varith, she said, naming her people. She circled her hands together, a sign of unity. Then she slashed the air with her hand. Exile. Her glow dimmed. Her shoulders hunched. Elias's eyes softened. He set the scrap of metal aside and leaned closer, elbows on his knees. Exile, he echoed quietly, the word foreign in his voice but waited. She blinked. Her throat tightened. He understood enough. Different, she whispered, her voice breaking. She pressed her small hand to her chest. Aeyla. Different. Varith, she gestured to the empty air, as though her people still hovered there. No. She shook her head slowly. No. Her golden eyes shimmered with tears. Elias didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply reached out, not touching, but close, his massive hand resting near hers on the stone, heat radiating from it. A silent presence. A promise. I am here. I hear you. For the first time since her banishment, Aeyla let herself weep. Quietly, silently, the tears streaked her luminous skin, glowing faintly in the starlight. When her tears slowed, Elias drew in a breath, deep and rough. He tapped his own chest. Elias, he said. Then, after a pause, he gestured upward toward the stars as she had done. Earth. She repeated softly. Earth. His jaw tightened. His eyes glistened in the firelight. Gone. He swept his hand outward, the same gesture she had made. Aeyla's breath caught. Gone, he said again, voice heavy, his gaze fixed on the flames. He picked up the twisted metal scrap and turned it once in his hands, then let it fall into the fire. It hissed, sparking faintly. His face was a mask of grief, muscles taut, but beneath it, acceptance. She stared at him, stunned. For the first time she saw him not as a stranger, not even as a human, but as kin of a kind she had never known. Both exiles. Both cast away from their worlds. Her glow pulsed once, slow and steady, like a heartbeat in the night. She whispered the only word she could think to offer. Together. He looked at her. His gray-blue eyes caught the firelight, shining bright against the dark. Then, slowly, he nodded. Together. That night, as the fire dwindled and they drifted into uneasy sleep, Aeyla dreamed not of her people, nor of the endless sea. She dreamed of standing side by side with Elias on solid ground, his shadow vast, hers small, both cast long in the sun. And for the first time since exile began, her dream was not a wound. It was a seed. The sea never stayed calm for long. By the third day after their shared confessions, the horizon began to darken again. Thick clouds crawled in from the west, bruised purple and green, dragging walls of rain across the water. The wind sharpened, hissing through the kelp cords that bound their raft. Aeyla stood at the edge, golden eyes narrowed, glow faint and steady. Her skin prickled with dread. She had seen storms before. Storms that swallowed entire islands, storms that cracked even the strongest vessels in two. But this storm, it moved too quickly. The waves swelled higher by the hour. Behind her, Elias secured the last of their supplies, bundles of dried kelp, shellfish, sharpened stakes. His movements were quick, efficient, but his jaw was tight, his face pale beneath the salt. He had not spoken much since the night of shared truths, though his gaze often lingered on her, thoughtful, heavy. Now, as the first lash of rain struck the raft, he caught her eyes. "Storm," he said simply. She nodded. "Storm." The sea rose into chaos. Waves slammed against the raft, sending water cascading across the planks. The sky cracked with lightning, white fire splitting the clouds. Thunder rolled so deep it shook Aeyla's bones. She clung to the lashings, her small frame buffeted by spray. Beside her, Elias braced his body against the wind, holding a beam in place as the raft groaned. His strength kept them steady, but even he could not fight the ocean forever. A massive swell crashed over them. Aeyla was ripped from her footing, thrown hard against the wood. Her glow flickered, dimming with fear. For a heartbeat, she thought she would be swept away into the black water. Then Elias's hand seized her wrist, pulling her back. His grip was iron, his face grim, rain streaming down his cheeks. He shouted something over the roar of the sea, words she couldn't understand. But the intent was clear. Hold on. She clung to him, gasping, heart hammering. Hours blurred. The storm raged without mercy. The raft cracked once, nearly splitting, but Elias's quick work with the kelp rope held it together. Still, they were battered, soaked, and shivering by the time the waves finally began to calm. Exhausted, they collapsed against the center beam, side by side, breathing hard. The rain softened into a mist. The sea hissed around them, restless but no longer murderous. For a long time, neither spoke. Only the rasp of their breath, the groan of wet wood. Finally, Elias broke the silence. His voice was raw, low. "Danger," he said, tapping the raft. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and pointed outward, to the endless horizon. "Always danger." Aeyla's throat tightened. She knew he was right. This world was not mercy. It was teeth and salt and endless hunger. And yet, she also saw something else in his eyes. Fear, not just of the sea but of her. Of what relying on her meant. Her glow dimmed. "Alone," she whispered, pressing her hand to her chest. She shook her head hard. "No," then she touched the beam between them, steady despite the storm. "Together." But Elias shook his head. His eyes darkened. He tapped his chest, then the sky above. "Earth," he said, voice breaking. He swept his hand outward, as if tearing away. "Gone." "No, together." Her heart twisted. He was afraid, not of her but of hope. Afraid of tying his future to something fragile, something alien. Her voice rose, sharp despite her small frame. "Together," she snapped, pointing at him, then herself, then at the raft beneath them. "Together or die." The word die cracked in the air like lightning. Elias flinched. His jaw clenched, eyes flashing with a storm of their own. For a moment, it seemed he might turn away, retreat back into silence. But then his shoulders sagged. His breath shuddered out. And slowly he reached forward, pressing his large hand over hers where it rested on the beam. "Together," he said softly. Her glow brightened, just faintly, but enough. That night, they found shelter on a drifting sandbar, barely more than a hump of white sand studded with twisted roots. They built a small fire from driftwood and huddled close against the chill. The storm had left them battered, their raft scarred, but alive. Aeyla sat curled at his side, her glow dim but steady. She could feel his warmth against her, hear the low rumble of his breathing. For the first time, she let herself lean into that warmth, just slightly. He didn't move away. Instead, he shifted, resting one arm loosely across his knees, his body curved protectively around her. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was fragile, yes, but it carried something new, something neither the ocean nor their fears had destroyed. Aeyla closed her eyes, listening to the hiss of the sea and the slow, steady rhythm of Elias's breath. Together. Even through storms, that word endured. The sea was glass. For once, the water lay smooth as obsidian, reflecting the stars so perfectly that the horizon seemed to vanish. The sky was a vast ocean above, the sea its mirror below, and Aeyla and Elias drifted at the seam between them. The sandbar had crumbled into the tide by morning, leaving them again upon their patched raft. But there was no storm now, no shrieking wind. Only stillness, broken by the occasional slap of a fish tail or the soft creak of wood beneath their weight. It felt, impossibly, like the world had paused. They sat side by side at the raft's edge, feet dangling just above the cool black water. Elias's great frame was hunched, his shoulders loosened, his gaze fixed upward at the constellations. Aeyla perched close to him, her golden glow faint but steady, washing the wood between them in soft light. He raised a hand, pointing to a cluster of stars high above. "Earth," he said quietly. His voice was hushed, reverent, as though the night itself might break if he spoke too loudly. Aeyla followed his gesture, though the stars he pointed to were not hers. To her, they belonged to no constellation, no story. Just scattered lights, nameless. Still, she echoed softly, "Earth." His jaw tightened. A silence stretched, long and aching. She could almost feel the weight of the memories pressing down on him, the people he had lost, the home he could never touch again. She reached out, hesitated, then touched his arm gently with her small hand. "Gone," she whispered, acknowledging the truth. Then she pointed at herself. "Aeyla." Pointed at him. "Elias." Finally, at the stars, sweeping her hand wide to take them all in. "Here." He looked at her. His eyes reflected starlight, pale blue flecked with silver. For a long moment, he did not speak. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "Here." The night deepened. They built no fire. The stars and Aeyla's glow gave enough light. The ocean breathed softly, lapping at the raft. It was as though the universe had bent close, wrapping them in silence, urging them to speak truths that storms and survival had not allowed. Elias broke the quiet first. He tapped his chest. "Soldier," he said, shaping the words slowly, carefully. He mimed holding a weapon, his movements practiced, precise. Aeyla tilted her head. She understood. A warrior. He nodded once, then shook his head hard, as if banishing something dark. His jaw flexed. "War," he added, voice raw. He clenched his fist and struck it softly against his chest. "War, gone. All gone." Her heart ached. She had seen enough of war to know what lingered in his voice. The shadows, the guilt, the knowledge that survival came with a cost. She touched her spear, lying beside her. Then she touched her chest, glow dimming. "Exile." The word was sharp, bitter in her mouth. He leaned closer, listening. She looked out at the endless sea, golden eyes reflecting the stars. Her voice softened, trembling. "Different," she said. She pressed her small hand to her heart. "Aeyla, different." She spread her fingers wide, casting them outward, away. "Varith, no." He didn't flinch, didn't recoil as her people had. Instead, he studied her, gaze steady. "Different," he repeated, tapping his chest. "Elias, different." His voice caught slightly on the word, but he didn't look away. Her breath shuddered. She blinked up at him, struck by the echo. Two outcasts, bound not just by survival but by difference itself. Something shifted in the silence between them. She realized how close they sat. Her small frame barely reached his shoulder, yet the warmth radiating from him seeped into her bones. His hand, resting on the wood beside hers, was broad, scarred, steady. For a moment, she imagined what it would be like if those fingers brushed her glow, if he traced the lines of her skin not with curiosity, but with care. Her glow brightened faintly at the thought, unbidden. He noticed. His gaze flicked down, then back up to her eyes. He said nothing, but his breath deepened, his body tense in stillness, as if waiting. Aeyla's throat tightened. Fear warred with longing in her chest. She had been cast out for being different, for daring to want more than her people allowed. But here, on this endless ocean, under stars that belonged to neither of them. There was no tribe to judge, no exile to enforce, only him. Her voice was barely a whisper. Together. He stared at her, eyes searching, uncertain. Then, slowly, his lips curved, not into laughter, not into doubt, but into something small, fragile, and real. Together, he said. And though neither of them moved further, though no embrace or touch sealed the word, it hung between them heavier than any vow. The stars wheeled overhead. Aeyla leaned her head gently against his arm, the rough fabric of his sleeve brushing her cheek. He stiffened for a heartbeat, then exhaled, shoulders loosening. He didn't move away. His warmth, his presence, his acceptance, it was enough. Her glow pulsed once, soft as a heartbeat, and for the first time since she had been cast into exile, she did not feel banished. She felt chosen. The ocean no longer looked like a prison. Weeks had passed since the storm, since the starlit vow whispered between them. In that time, the endless water had softened in Aeyla's eyes. The waves still broke sharp, the skies still turned wild, but now she saw more than threat. She saw rhythm, pulse, possibility. Together, she and Elias had carved a life from the sea. They found the atoll first, a crescent of jagged black stone jutting from the water, crowned with sparse greenery. It wasn't much, a strip of sand, some twisted roots clinging to the rock, but it offered permanence. A place to land. They built their shelter from driftwood and woven kelp, lashing it into the stone. Elias's strength raised beams and braced walls. Aeyla's smaller hands wove bindings strong enough to endure storms. At night, they slept curled in the narrow space, the salt air filtering through cracks, the sea their constant lullaby. Food became more than scavenged scraps. Elias designed crude traps with sharpened driftwood, and Aeyla guided him to the creatures she knew were safe. They hunted fish with spear and net, cracked shell fruit for water, gathered strands of edible kelp that grew along the tide pools. Soon, smoke from their fire coiled upward into the sky, steady and sure, a beacon of survival. But it wasn't just survival anymore. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the horizon, Elias dragged a long strip of polished wood onto the sand. He had shaped it slowly over days, scraping and sanding against stone, coaxing a curve into its length. Aeyla approached, tilting her head. "What?" she asked. He ran a hand along the smooth surface, then mimed paddling. "Boat." Her eyes widened. For a heartbeat, her chest clenched. A boat meant leaving. Leaving her. He saw the flicker of fear across her face. His expression softened. He shook his head quickly, pressing a hand to his chest. "No, a leave. Not leave." He gestured wide, across the water, then back to the boat. "More. More islands. More food." His voice grew steadier, certain. "Home." The word caught her breath. "Home," she echoed softly. And when he smiled, weary but warm, she believed it. They built the boat together. Days passed in a rhythm of work and rest, laughter and silence. Elias's voice grew clearer as he learned her words, and she picked up fragments of his, awkward, broken, but enough. "Strong," he would say, testing the ropes she tied. "Big," she teased back, patting his arm as he hauled beams too heavy for her to lift. "Small but sharp," he answered once, tapping her spear. She laughed, the sound bright against the crash of waves. Every exchange pulled them closer. The boat was finished at last. A sleek vessel of scavenged wood and kelp, sturdy enough for two. On the day they launched it, the sea was calm, the sky endless blue. They pushed off together, Elias's paddle cutting steady strokes, Aeyla's small hands guiding them through currents she had come to know like a second skin. The raft, their fragile salvation, drifted behind, left to the tides. This was theirs. Not desperate scraps lashed together, but creation. Intention. Future. That night, they camped on a larger island, rich with pools and vines. The air smelled of blossoms, sharp and sweet. Bioluminescent crabs scuttled through the sand, scattering light like fallen stars. They built a fire, roasted fish, ate until their bellies were full. And when the embers died low, they sat close at the water's edge, watching the stars ripple across the dark sea. Elias broke the silence first. "Aeyla," he said, her name shaped carefully, tender on his tongue. She turned, her glow pulsing faintly. He hesitated, searching for words. Then he tapped his chest, his scarred hand trembling just slightly. "Home," he said, then touched her. "You. Home." Her breath caught. Her glow flared bright, golden fire against the night. She reached for his hand, laying her small fingers against his. "You," she whispered, her voice thick. "Elias. Home." Their hands stayed clasped, rough skin against smooth glow. Neither needed more words. The ocean roared around them, vast and endless, but no longer lonely. Not exile, not ruin, life. Thrive. Seasons shifted. Storms came and passed. The sea gave and took, as it always had. But together they endured. Together they grew. The water world of Nerith, 7, once a sentence, became their kingdom. Not of stone or crown, but of firelight, laughter, and shared breath under alien stars. And in that boundless place between sky and sea, between human and Varith, between exile and loss, Aeyla and Elias loved. Not by chance, not by luck, but by choice.